So I want to start with the purpose of this talk. And if you're interested in React Native, then just taking React Native and playing with it for a weekend will give you a pretty good indication if it fits your needs. Now, what is much more difficult to assess is how does React Native perform in an environment of extreme high production scale, with dozens of developers working on the same app and millions of users demanding excellent performance from this app. So hopefully my talk will give you some insight regarding that. About myself, like he said, I lead the mobile apps architecture in Wix. Wix has about 10 offices around the world in 6 countries. Our headquarters are here in Israel. Our engineering is located mostly in Israel, but also in Lithuania and the Ukraine. So I want to start with something very weird that I found when I went into mobile several years ago, and that's the absurdity of doing mobile. So our story will start about 2 years ago. And that's when I like to take as the date that the world officially went mobile. So I'll take a fun statistic I like to start with from that time. And if the world has about 7 billion people in it, let's look at 2 numbers, 4.2 billion and 4.8. So 4.8 is the number of people that have a mobile phone. And the 4.2, unfortunately, is the number of people who own a toothbrush. So we're in a world where people have more mobile phones than toothbrushes. Another interesting statistic that you should know is where do people spend their time today? So the switch happened at the end of 2013. If you look at the average American and see how much time he spends, you measure every minute, and you see how much time they spend consuming digital media, you will see that they spend today over 65% on mobile and only 35% on desktop. And this trend is just growing, as you can see from these 2 graphs. Okay, so we're beyond the switch spot. And what are they doing on mobile? So if you take the time that they spend on their mobile device, which is more than 3 hours and 40 minutes per day, you see that they spend 90% of this time in apps, in native apps, and only 10% of the time on browsers. And that is also surprising. So to recap, everybody has a mobile phone, they're spending most of the time on it, and when they're on it, they're using mobile apps. So we have an obvious conclusion from all of that, which I hope you already know, and that's that product today must exist on all channels. And the channels are web, iOS native, and Android native. And I'm not saying that mobile is more important than than the web, but it's as equally important, and you have to deal with it. So let's look at such a product as an example, and this product will be Wix. So what does Wix do? We're a company. We allow anyone to create their own website by themselves. It's a DIY. You just go online, and you can drag and drop and create amazing-looking websites for free. And we have a lot of premium services and cool stuff. Here is an example restaurant created with Wix. Very beautiful. You could also create sites like online stores. This site, for example, you could see it also has an e-commerce cart. You can manage inventory, add stuff to the cart, accept payments, manage orders. So Wix is much more than just a static website builder. It's a whole platform that lets you manage your business, lets you promote it, lets you accept payments, communicate with your customers, and so forth. A little bit of numbers for Wix. So first of all, Wix has about 90 million users. Originally, the title when I submitted was 80, but we grew. Okay, so that's a good thing. So 90 million users around the world use Wix. We have around 1,200 employees. And among these employees, the majority, we have a huge investment in engineering. 38% of our employees are engineers. Among these engineers, in front end, okay, since this is a React conference, we have about 200 front-end developers. So as you can see, Wix is a large company with significant engineering firepower. And as we said before, mobile is important. And this brings us to the very interesting question, where is the Wix mobile app? And if you would have looked in the app stores up until a few months ago, you would have seen that there is no mobile app for Wix. And this is very surprising. And I think this really gives you a good example of the absurdity of doing mobile today. So let's see why. And my take on it is that the core problem is that mobile development is pretty much broken. And it doesn't matter if you're a big company or a small company, you're pretty much not able, it's not feasible to do the mobile that you want. So let's take a look at a typical startup, and it's actually a very good example because in Wix, in order to maintain the startup mentality of a company with 1,200 people working in it, what we did is we split Wix into mini companies. And every mini company is like a startup by itself, and it deals with a specific product group. For example, with Wix stores, it will be one company, and for Wix blog, another company, and for Wix restaurants, a different company. And a typical startup, a typical mini company in Wix would have a few product guys working in it. They would have their own designers. They would have a few front-end developers implementing the client for the product. And they would have a few back-end developers developing the server. And if we dive into the engineers among this crowd, you would see that right now in Wix we have two basic types of engineers. And we recruit them differently because they're very different types of people. The front-end engineer usually likes to develop with JavaScript. They're familiar with React and Angular and HTML and CSS. And the back-end engineer in Wix works with Scala, and that's a very different language. And the Wix framework for back-end is so complicated that it takes 4 months just to play with it until you can write significant code. So these people are different. Now, if you want to add mobile to this mix, then let's take a look at how you develop mobile apps. So when we looked at mobile apps 2 years ago, there's a huge debate about if you do hybrid technologies or you do pure native or cross-platform. I don't want to get into this. All I'll say is that if you look at the 100 most popular apps in the world, apps like Facebook, apps like YouTube, or Google Play, which is a popular app, Instagram, or Apple's App Store and Twitter, you would see that among the 100, the vast majority is implemented natively, and almost purely natively. And if you compare the right side to the left side of the screen, you will see on the right Android apps and on the left iOS apps, and they look different, and they behave different, and the SDKs are different, and you have to implement them differently. So the decision we took in Wix 2.5 years ago is that we're going to try to compete with those best-of-breed apps and have native engineers that will implement everything with 2 stacks, 1 stack for iOS and 1 stack for Android. And that's where I came in, since that's my background. And let's see, so our iOS engineers, they would program in Objective-C and Swift, and they are familiar with the iOS SDK. Android engineers, unfortunately, are different. They work with Java, usually, and they're familiar with Android SDK. And it turns out that the similarity between the 2 platforms is so small that usually the experts in each field, they don't know both platforms. So you would have to hire different engineers for each of them. So what would it do to our engineering structure across Wix? So on the top, you can see all the different companies in Wix, Wix blog, Wix stores and hotels, and all the feds, if we just concentrate on the client right now. And as we said, we have 200, because we're a very big company with tons of products. So if I were to try and translate the entirety of the Wix product to native mobile, what will I have to do? I would have to start hiring 200 iOS engineers. And I would have to start hiring 200 Android engineers. And this doesn't make sense. And the core of this problem is because all the engineering technologies are siloed. You cannot take people, engineers, from one group and mix and match with another group. You cannot share any of the code. It's a big problem. And what comes out of this is that compromise is inevitable. And that's the absurdity of doing mobile. If you are doing mobile, you have to compromise. So where would you compromise? You could compromise on productivity and just say, let's pay the price and hire 3-fold engineers for everything. And that's insane and expensive, but you could do that. You could compromise on quality and just say, OK, let's just make shitty apps. And you can compromise on depth and say, OK, let's focus on one aspect of our product, focus on one platform, and just don't translate everything to mobile. Just do a small part. And that's eventually what we had to do. So what we did is we took our native engineers and we concentrated them in one of the companies, and we had an amazing mobile product for Wix stores, but what about the rest of Wix? So this was a problem. So now let's take a break from Wix and look what happens when the giants suffer. And let's take a look at another company, and this company made a different compromise. They made a compromise on productivity. They decided to hire 3 times as many engineers and just do everything thrice. And this company is Facebook. Now, it's the home of the most popular apps in the world. Okay, if you look at, I think the #1 and #2 apps in popularity are Facebook Messenger and the Facebook app. And as Zuckerberg announced, Facebook has been mobile first since 2012. And even if you look at the numbers, okay, let's look at where the money is in Facebook. And in the Q2 revenue earnings report for 2016, you would see that the majority of the earnings, the revenue for Facebook comes from ads, naturally, and 84% of ad revenue comes from mobile. So Facebook is a mobile company. And it turns out that the siloed model is killing them, killing their productivity. It's very hard to move fast with it. And they have the firepower to start an industry shift. So I recommend that you Google TechCrunch, silos, Facebook, and you will see an excellent article explaining all of this. And what they are naturally proposing is, let's take a look at JavaScript. And JavaScript is supposed to be the holy grail of cross-platform languages, because if we had to focus on one language, it would be a good choice, because that's the only way we could conquer all three platforms that we want. And that's because the web limits us. Web browsers don't support anything else, and with native, you can usually bring with you whatever you want. Now, is JavaScript a compromise? Because it would seem that if web browsers limit us, there's something wrong with it, and it turns out that it isn't. JavaScript is an amazing language. With the new standards, JavaScript is a very advanced language which is perfect for business logic. So it's actually even more, it has more advanced features than most of the languages for native development. But doing mobile with JavaScript it's not new. I mean, we've heard it before. We've been hearing it ever since 2009. You're probably familiar with PhoneGap, which started at 2009, and with Accelerator, which started then as well. And they were preaching, build mobile with JavaScript, it will be great, it will be more productive. But it didn't work. If you try to use those technologies, the apps that you would get are not best of breed. They could not compete with those 100 perfect apps that I showed you in the App Store. So it didn't catch on, these technologies. And the big, and the problem was mostly performance, because when you have JavaScript and you have native, you have a lot of overhead communicating between the native and the JavaScript, and we couldn't fix this overhead. It didn't seem to work. So the big question is, what's changed? What's different now, and can this be fixed? So let's take a look at React Native, which is the proposed solution. So React Native, the philosophy is learn once, write anywhere. So you don't actually write cross-platform code, but you more learn a set of skills that you can apply to different platforms. And so that's a very good concept, because it allows each platform to maintain its uniqueness. You use mostly for your code base JavaScript and React, and this promises you very high productivity. Okay, you want to write code quickly. React is free and open source. And it's important to say that the apps are not hybrid apps. You don't have web views and HTML UI that kind of fakes the native UI. The UI components that you have are purely native. So let's take a look at the screenshot from our app on the side, and you would see that the navigation bar is UI Navigation Controller, which is the native component for navigation in iOS. And the image is UI Image View, and the slider is UI Slider. So the components are native components, which are instantiated by React Native. And that's excellent. And the JavaScript just drives it behind the scenes. So where does the performance come from? And that's a whole talk by itself about React Native performance. I will just say one sentence about it, and that's it's very similar to how React on the web works. Because on the web, you essentially have the same problem, because you have the JavaScript running, and you have the DOM, which is a native construct. And when the JavaScript tries to update the DOM, the updates are synchronous and they're slow. And one of the optimizations that React brings us is the virtual DOM, and JavaScript can update JavaScript, and then the updates to the native, to the DOM, are done in batches asynchronously. So this same concept of React works perfectly on React Native because we have the same issue. So updates in React Native are asynchronous, and that's the base of why the performance is better. Sounds kind of too good to be true. So I'll show you some of the downsides of using React Native right now. And first of all, it's not for the faint of heart. So React Native is barely out. On iOS, it's out for 18 months, and on Android for 12 months. So that's very, very new platform. And it's very unstable. We're before version 1. Right now, it's at 0.33, and they release minor versions every 2 weeks. And these break left and right. So your code base breaks for a few days when you upgrade versions. So that's horrible. It's very unpolished. If you look at things that the React Native team is working on, you would see that some parts just don't work well. For example, we were very unhappy with the navigation solution that React Native has out of the box. It was unusable for us. Okay, it didn't measure up to real native apps. Also, list views. If you have lists with a lot of information in them, the performance was poor. Both memory and the runtime performance, there are issues there that are still unsolved. And also, it's incomplete. So if you say you would rely on open source to fix those things, the ecosystem is still small. It's lacking in peripheral components, so that's a problem. So when we went to management and we pitched React Native, and imagine that was a year ago, things were much worse. But we believed in the vector that it's going so well that we said, even if it's not perfect right now, it's open source. So we made a kind of a promise, a deal with management, and we said that every wall we hit, any wall we hit with something which is unusable in React Native today, and for our performance and UX standards we have to have, we'll just fix it ourselves, and we'll contribute it back as open source. And that's what we did. So let's talk about the Wix app. So the plan was to make an app for Wix which allows Wix users to take their site that they built on the web and manage it. They could edit content on their site. If they have a blog, they could publish posts on their site. If they have an e-commerce store, they could see the products, change inventory, handle orders. Everything they can do in Wix, they would be able to do in the app. So it's important to understand that that's a company-wide platform because we have 200 front-end engineers working on the web product of Wix. So many of these engineers would eventually find themselves writing code on this platform. So it's a company-wide effort. It will be fully in React Native. We ditched our previous stack and we decided to rewrite everything from scratch. And we decided it will be in one app, not many. So every product group would somehow be inside this app, which is it's a very high standard to try and aim for. And we implemented it from scratch, and we kicked it off 8 months ago. We decided to start with iOS, and that's just because it was released 6 months earlier, and port everything after to Android. So the main thing that we got out of it is an engineering structure that finally makes sense, and this can scale. So now you see that I changed the feds, instead of the green guys, to green guys who also have a little bit of red and blue. Because 70% of your code is in JavaScript, so they touch Android and they touch iOS. And that's an amazing thing you get out of React Native. Now, we still have native engineers, but the number makes sense. Our magic number is about 10%. So if we have 200 front-end engineers, about 20 of them would be native. So 10 iOS, 10 Android. In practicality, we concentrate them in the same core team in Wix. But if you would want to look how it would look in a startup mode, then basically you could have, let's take a few engineers and put them in each team, and it would work just as well. So if you have a team of 20 people, just hire 2 native guys. That makes sense. So the engineering structure finally works, and the business logic is all in JavaScript. Now, and that's a very modern dialect of JavaScript used in React Native. ES7, Babel, the works. And one of the things I like to show off to native engineers coming to the team is async await, because asynchronicity in JavaScript is so well handled that it's even better than what they do in native today. Okay, in iOS, Swift, and Objective-C, and Java, they don't come close to asynchronicity handled this way. We have type systems. We believe in types because we believe that you can't scale huge projects without a type system. Right now, React Native relies on Flow, and we rely on it as well, but we want to switch to TypeScript because we believe it will be better and more explicit, but it still didn't happen yet. For our data flow, we rely on Redux entirely. Actually, I'm a little bit lying because we allow every product group in Wix, which are showcased in the app, to make their own choice. We don't enforce Redux, but most of them do choose Redux. And this also makes that inside our app, we don't have one Redux store, we actually have many. And that works very well and keeps encapsulation between the different product groups. We have a lot of code reuse, and we can finally use code that we did for the web, and of course, we can share between iOS and Android. So how does this platform look like? So this platform looks like, so let's take a look at the engineering, at the product groups. So you see them on the left, for example, the guys from Wix Blog and Wix Stores and Wix Hotels. And what they're making is they're making modules, NPM modules in JavaScript. All the purple you see is JavaScript. So they're writing their APIs, interfacing their backends, writing the business logic and all the layout of the UI. And all the product groups, we take all their NPM modules and we combine them together in the CI into one huge JavaScript bundle that runs inside React Native. And as you can see, that is the majority of the app. That's where all the business logic lies. Now, we still have a core team, and this core team, aside from writing JavaScript, also handles all the native stuff. And we use native for interfacing with the operating system. For example, if we want to have good access to the contacts on your phone, we would use native to do that and expose it via JavaScript. And for core stuff, like handling caching, memory management, and for the wow factor. So imagine if you have a cool UI component that blurs as you scroll. So stuff like that you have to do natively, and we would expose it with JavaScript, and we do it in the core team. So when you have an app built of two parts, the JavaScript part, which is where you hopefully have most of your updates. And in the future, we believe that we will be able to have about 90% of our updates in this area. And this area could be theoretically updated in real time, immediately. You don't have to go through the App Store because the JavaScript bundle is just another file, just like an image. You could send it over there and just parse it again. The native part, you still have to go through the app stores, but luckily, a year ago, it took about 1 week to get an app approved, but today it's about 24 hours. So all the native updates that we have to pass through Google and Apple, and then they get to our users. About continuous integration. So continuous integration is a core value in Wix. It's a state of mind of the entire company. And if you look at all of our backend and all of our front end, it's all continuously integrated and continuously delivered. We claim to push to production 60 times a day. And mobile was always the black sheep in Wix because you have a release train because of the app stores. So we couldn't work this way. And now, when the majority is in JavaScript, and what we make are NPM packages, so when every product group pushes their code, we just publish its NPM package immediately. And when you release on lifecycle this module, we build the entire JavaScript bundle, and we can deliver it, and we can code push. So code push is a technology by Microsoft, an amazing technology, also open source and free, that we use to push JS bundles. We still don't fully do it in production, but we're planning to. And it will allow us to push updates over the air for most of our products, and that's amazing. So mobile can finally have continuous integration. So let's look what the build process looks like. So I'm in one of the companies, in one of the product companies, and I made a change to one of my modules. So I push my code to Git, and what we have then is the CI, continuous integration, and reuse Tim Wix, and my module is going to be built and tested. Okay? After the test pass, hopefully, it will be automatically published to NPM, to a private repo that we have. Now, let's say I want to release my version. What I would go to lifecycle, and lifecycle is a system that we have in Wix. It's a web front end that basically allows you to mark all the projects in Wix as release candidates or general availability. So you can just mark them, and they will be deployed to production. So I would take my module, and I would mark it as an RC, release candidate. What we do then in the CI automatically in TeamCity, we build not your module, but we build the entire Wix app. The huge app with all the product groups. But what we do is we take the RC version of your module with all the GAs, the stable versions of all the other companies in Wix. We build it together, run all the tests, and we deploy it. Now, originally, we tried to use TestFlight, if you're familiar with it, but it limits the amount of people who could test stuff internally. So right now, we have an enterprise certificate for iOS. Android, you have less of problem with. And using this enterprise certificate, you could sign and make apps for internal testing. And since we have 1,200 employees, that's something that we need to have because we can't handle the limits that Apple imposes. So we use a tool called AppBlade, which lets you manage a lot of flavors of your app for internal testing. And it's important because you have a flavor for every company because it's the RC of that company with the GAs of all the others. Now, when we want to release and deploy the entire app, you would go to Lifecycle, and you would just take the Wix app and you RC it. And then we would build in the CI automatically a version that has GA of all the modules of everybody else. And this version would be later automatically deployed to TestFlight and Google Play, so we could start our external beta, and after the external beta, we can just open it up to anybody else. So that's the way it works. Our builds take a long time. It's about 15 minutes on Android and 25 minutes on iOS. And that's not including a ton of E2E scenarios. So this works, and the module system works, but it's very complicated. And to give you a sense of the complexity, imagine if we have an internal library that the core is using, and we want to introduce a change in all the modules and just make a breaking change. So you would have to go to everyone and just tell them, OK, switch to the new version. And that's because at many times you can't have multiple versions running at the same time in the app, especially with native code. Native code, you can only have one instance of it. So anyone using the app, all the mini companies would have to use the exact same version. And that's very, very difficult with the NPM model. In NPM 3, it's easier, but still, you have duplicates. And we cannot have duplicates. So there are cries among our engineers, let them say hi, to switch to a monorepo approach. And that would improve this vastly, because if you want to have a change, a breaking change, you could just refactor and change all the projects using this at the same time. So that's an idea we're playing with. We're not doing it yet. Another problem that we have is that QA doesn't scale. The problem is regression. So we're working for about 8 months. And right now, to do a QA cycle for our regression takes 12 man days, actually 20 man days per platform. That's insane. That's a huge amount of QA, and it's rising linearly. So the answer, obviously, and in the rest of Wix, we have very little QA. In the backend, we don't have any manual QA at all. And we strongly believe in automated tests for everything. So let's see how does this fit into the React Native model. And it fits pretty well, because unit tests are very easy to do. Since the majority of your code is in JavaScript, vanilla JavaScript, you can actually test it on the CI on Node very easily. Okay, it's just vanilla JavaScript, very easy to test. What about end-to-end tests? The tip of the testing pyramid. Now, these are very important, and right now we're using Appium to do it. It's UI automation. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's kind of like Selenium, just for mobile. And it's not working well for us, and I'll talk about it in a second. And we have a void there. It's a problem that we currently don't know how to solve. We firmly believe in TDD, and test-driven development in Wix, and as soon as we'll fix all the testing issues that we have, we believe that full automation is the only way that we could scale our app. So let's talk about why end-to-end tests are problematic right now. And I think the core reason is flakiness. So let's imagine that I have 100 end-to-end scenarios in my app, and that makes sense. And the problem with end-to-end is it's flaky. It tests the whole thing, black boxy. And there are many congestion points in the app. So sometimes things don't behave the same way. This part is a little slower, and you try to have the test execute very quickly, because end-to-end tests take a lot of time running. So let's say every test is flaky in about 0.5%, and if you remember your probability from school, it makes the entire suit 40% flaky, meaning there is a 40% chance it will fail without any good reason. Everything is still working. And this trend is making end-to-end undependable. And the solution we are finding for this is presented in a library that we're working on. It's not fully operational yet, but it's going to be open source, called Detox. And it stems from the idea that flakiness kills end-to-end. And the idea that black box testing can't handle flakiness because you're testing things from the outside, which makes a lot of sense because you want to test what you're actually shipping, of course, but it doesn't work, it doesn't scale. So what we believe we have to do is switch to gray box testing. And gray box testing means that you take code and you inject it inside your app, and this code helps you test it end-to-end. So this violates the black box concept, which is good, but we believe it's worth it. We have special support for React Native in it. There's a lot of flakiness going in React Native, especially because of the JavaScript and the native bridge communicating. Okay? It's almost impossible to test with Appium. And we write all of our E2E tests in JavaScript, which is amazing because we can share them. It's going to be released soon to GitHub. Right now, we have a dev version you can play with. It's very cool. A little bit about production monitoring. QA doesn't catch everything. Okay, I'll tell you about a bug that we had in production lately, and that was with images that you can upload to your media manager in Wix. For example, I want to upload an image to a blog. So we tested it on iPhones, and it worked, and it passed QA, and everything was jolly, but we forgot about screenshots. And it seems in iOS that images that you take, photos, are JPEGs, but screenshots are PNGs. And apparently, uploading the PNGs was a little bit different, and it just failed. And QA missed it completely, and the developers missed it completely. So in order to have a fully production app, you have to invest a lot in production monitoring. But the problem with React Native apps is that you have to monitor many things. So let's see if you recognize all the logos. These are old things that we use. We use New Relic to find native errors and find crashes. We use Sentry, a different tool, to report JavaScript errors, because they're completely different, and you need a tool that specializes in them, because these tools need to give you enough information that you could debug the problem with. And JavaScript stack traces are horrible. So JavaScript-specific tools know how to make the most out of those asynchronous stack traces. We report a lot of business analytics events to our own homegrown business intelligence solution. And we use Mixpanel, which is also an analytic solution, but we don't use that for business intelligence, not for business events, but for development, for developers. What we do is we have middleware that reports all of our Redux actions to Mixpanel, and it's very good because what we could do then, if we have a production issue, we could actually investigate the logs from Mixpanel and understand what happened. We're also trying out a solution called Upsy. It's an Israeli company, and what they allow is screen recording for usability purposes. So if you have specific app users that you designate as users that you want to beta on, you could actually see what they're doing in the app and where it fails. Let's talk about training. A very worrisome area for me was how long would it take to train the existing people in Wix to use this new stack? So let's take the feds. Feds, to train them into the new React Native able feds, it's very quick. If they know React, it's a matter of days. If they don't know React and Redux, it takes us about 2 weeks until they can start writing code. Usually about a month after the code it actually starts being very good. But it takes 2 weeks until they have all the basic training in line. So the more interesting question is, how long does it take to take a native developer, a native iOS or Android developer, and teach them JavaScript if they've never used it? Teach them Redux and React and the declarative concepts. And surprisingly, it takes us 2 weeks as well. And that is excellent, because this means the stack is very easy to get into. So are we happy? So on the left, you can see the app. So first of all, we started about 8 months ago, and the app is in production, both in iOS and in Android, which is amazing. It took us 6 months from zero, because we started from scratch, until we have apps in the app stores. And you can look at the app on the left. We are very, very happy with the results. It looks completely native. It looks amazing. 80% of our code is in JavaScript today. And this is amazing. I mean, we read about those numbers, but we always thought it's for small projects and stuff like that. But our project isn't small. We have over 20 engineers working on this app right now, and this number is going to rise because more and more product companies in Wix are joining in. Regarding performance, beforehand, we had a stack which was purely native. We had to implement everything twice. So this stack is about 90% as performant, but we have a roadmap to improve this. So 90% is excellent. Okay, so the app behaves beautifully. Okay, you won't notice serious problems. It's not as perfect as it was before, but we have plans. We are releasing open source, and React Native by itself is advancing. So most of these performance issues will be fixed in upcoming months or years. Our development is insanely faster. If we compare it to our mobile development before, we're developing 3 times as fast. And this is simply insane. One of the reasons for that is that we have about 70% code sharing between iOS and Android, which we didn't have before. So bottom line, yes, we are happy, even for high-scale production. React Native was a game changer for us, a complete game changer. It was an enabler. And the main problem was that you could not scale mobile engineering inside of Wix without it. The core thing to take from here is it makes mobile make sense inside a big company. I want to close with making an impact. As I mentioned before, any wall we hit, and we hit many walls, because when you do high-scale production and you want to have apps that kick ass, and you have tons of users, you hit many walls on things that are simply not good enough in the current ecosystem. And we look at any one of them as an open source opportunity. We pride ourselves as bringing the native back to React Native. So we release every single thing that we do as open source. All the infra is open source from day one. And everything we use, most of these projects are used in production by our apps for iOS and Android. So not many projects in React Native are open source projects, are both for iOS and Android. Okay, that's part of the beginning, the immaturity of the ecosystem. But ours are always both ways because we're in production in both. And our app actually relies on 15 projects that we ourselves published, and you can use them. So that's awesome. You could see some of those names here. We have, I have about a minute left, so I'll mention a few of them by name. React Native Navigation, I think, is our most popular one, and it stems from a big issue that we had with the navigation solution that React Native comes with. And the problem is that the skeleton, the navigation skeleton, the tabs, the side menu, the navigation bar are not native in React Native. They're JavaScript. They're faked to look kind of like native, and they don't behave the same way. And I don't know if you're familiar with Uncanny Valley, but this thing drives me personally insane. So we have a solution that gives you perfectly native navigation in React Native, which is amazing, and is also linked from the official documentation. Some other things, we are investing in Redux and testing Redux. They always say that Redux is easy to test, pure functions and stuff. But if you look at the examples, you won't see many good testing examples. So that's an open source we're working on because we want to be fully TDD. And we found that testing thunks is not as simple as we've hoped. But we have open sources that help you out with that. We have tons of components. For example, scroll views that know the input boxes in them and know how to sync in on the correct place. These are problems for mobile that React Native does not solve out of the box. And I think Detox will be a rising star as soon as we finish, I think, version 1. So that's pretty much it. You can follow me on Twitter. I always tweet about our latest open sources and stuff like that. You can hit me up with questions. And I think we've just finished our time. So we could either take questions if anyone has, or just find me afterwards.
Yeah, Ken Isman. We have 5 minutes for questions.
OK, so we can have 5 minutes for questions. So go ahead.
Hi. This is more of a general question regarding React. I'm not sure if this is the form, maybe the Q&A would be better, but you brought up the whole open source and licensing. So there's the licensing issues. I've heard a lot about it lately with a lot of people starting to use React, that there is some fear that Facebook still has the ability to revoke a React license for just about anyone, for just about any reason. So how do you go about that with putting so much of React in your code?
OK, so that's actually a very good question, and it's much more about React Native, because Wix is heavily invested in React by itself. We have many of our products in Wix are on the web, on React. So when we initially started working with React, there was a huge, we had this supposed issue. And I think eventually, I'll tell you the rumors that I've heard, and that was a long time ago, and the rumors were that Facebook can revoke your React license if you sue Facebook or a company that Facebook doesn't want you to sue. So some people claim it's a problem. I think in Wix we've decided that it's a non-issue. And I remember a few posts from back then from even Dan Abramov about this and how they changed the licensing. So personally, we don't consider this a big problem. And I think React is worth it, and the ecosystem is so thriving that it's worth. We don't consider, and our legal department does not consider it a big issue. Anything else? Boom, boom, boom. So I'll give you a question. OK. I have a question that I want to ask.
What about small teams?
OK. Good question. I think React Native actually works much better for small teams. And it's very easy to test because you can just try it out. And the reason for that is because usually in a small team, you won't have the different people that can do the different types of work. What this stack in mobile, now let's say you have a startup, and that's a very classic case, and you usually have like 1 or 2 engineers in the startup, and you have to build an entire project. And you want your project to be in the web, and you want to have a native app for iOS and Android, and you want to have a backend. But you don't have enough money to pay engineers with all those different skill sets. So with React Native, you could do pretty much the whole thing with one person, because all the knowledge that you need is pretty much JavaScript. So what you would do is, you would do Node for your backend. By the way, we do that in our teams as well. The serious backend in Wix is in Scala, but the front-end servers are in Node. And that allows the front-end developers to close the loop on the REST APIs. So we do promote Node, and we love it, and it works very well in production. So you could use that skill set. And for web, of course, JavaScript and React. And for the native, it's okay, even if you don't have the native guy that I talked about, you can still rely on open source, because native guys out there are publishing libraries that just give you out of the box the components that you need. So that's okay. So definitely, I think it works wonderfully for small teams, and it makes it possible where it wasn't possible previously. You had to focus on one platform. So the question that I wanted to ask, so I'll give you one, I think it'll be the last one, is what happens if you don't want to start your entire app from scratch, like we did? What happens if you're like Airbnb, that's a real example, and you already have a native app out there, which is implemented almost purely natively, and you do want to improve your productivity? Now, do you need to take this entire app and throw it out? So the wondrous thing about React Native is that you don't need to. And Airbnb are actually starting to test and put React Native inside from a very small scale. And you can actually, it pretty much works like the web. In the web, you can just take, if you have an existing site or web app, you can take just one area of it and just start React from there. Put a React root and just grow your React code base. And you can even have multiple roots in the app. And it works the same way in React Native. So basically, you could say, let's take a feature, or maybe a new feature, and start implementing all the new features with React Native, and it would sync very well and work very well out of the box. And that's amazing, because it lets you adopt React Native very easily. Now, the only caveat to that is memory. Now, it's funny that if you look at Facebook, and you say, OK, if React Native is so amazing, are you using it in the production Facebook app? And the answer is no. They're still using React Native in satellite apps, but not in the main Facebook app. And the main reason for that is still memory. The problem is that the JavaScript, you have to have a JS core running inside the app. And it's very memory hungry. And when you have, if you don't have a lot of memory, for example, Facebook on Android, memory is a hell. You really have to budget it carefully. Then if you spend a lot of memory on JavaScript, it's a problem. But memory is being managed and being improved. And if your app is not super memory hungry, then it's going to be OK. OK?